Welcome, everybody, to Guaranteed Income and the Current Safety Net. My name is Michael Howard, and I will be moderating this session. The session is brought to you with the generous support of our sponsors, the Gerald Huff Fund for Humanity, Humanity Forward Foundation, Aid Kit, and Steady. Before I start, I'd like to give a brief overview of how to use Crowdcast. If you would like to submit a question to the speakers, please use the Ask a Question function, which is at the bottom of your screen. You may also vote on questions already posted by other attendees, and this will help us to determine which questions to prioritize. Next, there is a chat box where you can hold side conversations. We see that's already going. And this is where we will also post any links and supplemental information. In order to keep things moving, we do not intend to respond to any activity in the chat, so please be sure to submit any questions using the Ask a Question function. I'm going to give brief introductions to our speakers. If you use the little circle with an I in it right next to the title on your screen, you can find more information about the speakers and also on the conference webpage. Our first speaker will be Nicholas Rodelo. He studied economics at Boston University. His research interests mainly revolve around benefits policy. Our second speaker will be Ann Danforth, who is a policy advocate at Maine Equal Justice, a nonprofit legal aid and economic justice organization working to increase economic security, opportunity, and equity for people in Maine. She's a graduate of Columbia University with a master's in social work program. And the third speaker will be Luisa Deprez, who is professor at the University of Southern Maine with an expertise in social welfare policy, especially the restrictive nature of safety net programs and the implications of poverty in educational and welfare policies on women. Each speaker will talk for about 10 minutes, and then we will have time to open it up to question and answers and conversation among the panelists. So I will turn it over now to Nick.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this presentation. Let me share my screen. So today I'm going to be presenting, I shared the slides in the chat if anyone wants to follow along or get a better view of them. Some of the figures are a little pixelated because I screenshotted them. So yeah, here we go. We're going to be benchmarking nutrition assistance programs against cash transfers. I got a lot of help from Max Geddes in this. He's been a great mentor, great friend for the past 2 years now, I think, or a year and a half since I met him. And yeah, I'm really excited. So, sorry, did my audio just cut out? Can everybody hear me? Hello? Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, lost sound. So yeah, the introduction, or the inspiration for this paper was mainly because at PolicyEngine we've been studying, cash transfers, mainly universal basic income, flat rates for everyone. But we're also really interested in exploring alternatives to that because it's a very varied political landscape in the United States. It's hard to navigate, and having good policy ideas isn't always enough. People want different alternatives. People want to see different options, and I think we really need to explore everything. So cash benefits were ended in '96 Clinton welfare reform primarily. The AFDC, the Aid for Families of Dependent Children program, was replaced by TANF. Gives some cash aid, very patchwork, 50 different programs really for each state. Over the past 26 years, we've had different in-kind programs fill this gap, mainly USDA programs such as SNAP and WIC. Most of these benefits are in kind, which means SNAP can only be bent on food. It used to be through food stamps, now it's through an EBT card. Used to come in another restrictive form, WIC and free lunch programs come in other restrictive forms. Either have a card or you have an actual stamp booklet where you have to, for WIC, pick out, you're entitled to like 16 ounces of milk from certain brands, and you have to give that to the cashier. So very, very big change from the AFDC. The inspiration for this paper is Wiederspan, Rhodes, and Schaefer. This paper It's really, really interesting. I recommend everybody go read it. It modeled a negative income tax that's budget neutral if you were to replace SNAP, WIC, the National School Lunch Program, and the Earned Income Tax Credit. Outside of the USDA programs, the Earned Income Tax Credit is one of the largest anti-poverty programs in the country. Did not go ahead and model that in this. We're focusing just on the food programs, but yeah, really interesting paper. They found that they could eliminate poverty as defined by the federal poverty line with a per family guaranteed income through negative income tax. What we model is a little bit different. We're modeling a per person negative income tax with an infant allowance. One of the issues is there's really not any extra aid for children in such policies, and Max had the great idea of doing it a per infant bonus as well. And then we're also doing budget neutrality in our paper or in this presentation based on outlays, so just the amount of money people are actually getting, and you'll see those breakdowns per program in a little bit, and not on total costs. Total costs would include like admin, would include education for WIC, all those kinds of things. We're just talking about the actual provision of benefits. So these numbers would be quite a bit different if we were to fully model admin costs, but I think they get the idea. So yeah. I want to go through a quick lit review, just overview some of the problems and what's going on with different the food programs in the United States today, and also give some baselines to give you an idea of like what we actually understand about these programs. So yeah, so in SNAP, one of the biggest issues is there's preference distortion. So basically, SNAP usually ends up giving people too much money for food that they would otherwise spend on other items. So, you know, say you give a family $800 in 1 month, they only spend $600 on food. They can't really do anything else with that other $200, except they can buy more food that they don't need, and that's often going to junk food, soda, sugary snacks, et cetera, based on this paper, Whitmore 2002. It also gives them the opportunity to sometimes sell them at a discount to other members of their communities. Doesn't really work out great, and it's a really steep discount to the face value. And there's also criminal penalties, so it's very risky, and most people don't do it. Yeah, so if we're talking about what SNAP actually does in PolicyEngine, so what I did here is in PolicyEngine, we're able to model pre and post reform. So what I was able to do is I was able to get a pre-reform scenario where we didn't have SNAP. You subtract that out and then create a post-reform scenario where we add SNAP back in. And this allows us to just see like the marginal impact of the SNAP program and see like what it does to the economy. So by itself, SNAP costs gives $240 billion out to people. Again, we're not including admin costs. It reduces poverty by 35% relative to the counterfactual of not having SNAP. 30% of people come out ahead, 0% of people come out behind, etc. I want to note that this includes the emergency allotment. So during 2020, during the COVID pandemic, the worst of it, there were some modifications to the SNAP program to greatly increase the amount. So this actually about doubled the poverty relief impact. So we're comparing against like a really supercharged SNAP here. I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. Yeah, by income decile mainly affects the lower 30%. Yeah, and WIC, it's costly and it has low take-up. So it's actually one of the programs that I held on to for the longest time, I think, in terms of thinking it was like really good. And it has very high satisfaction. It has, I also have other figures I pulled from that in the paper I'm writing. It has the highest bipartisan support of any program. So it's not exactly an easy thing to take an axe to. It does work really well for what it does. It's just expensive and burdensome on the individual. So if those barriers could be removed or just replaced with cash, I think it'd be much better. So yeah, 65% of participants found it a hassle, 43% found it stigmatizing, and it's been declining the past 10 years. This is the other point. There's really poor take-up among a lot of these programs. So at any given time, and you know, things change really quickly. Pregnancy only lasts 9 months, and you have another couple of years of eligibility for WIC. People are cycling in and out of this program all the time, but there's only 50% roughly of people who are actually taking advantage of it. So it's really hard to defend that. With SNAP, I believe it's about 25% that are not taking advantage of it when they're eligible. And then EITC is about 30%. So yeah, WIC poverty reduction effects. It's a much smaller program. It's only 4 billion as opposed to 240 in our model. Poverty falls 1%, 6% people come out ahead. Yeah, mainly affects children. Really small effects here. Also mainly affects its bottom 3 income deciles. We're having change to household incomes of 70% from SNAP, but we're having 0.4% from WIC. So just very, very different programs in scale. And then I think one more thing I want to talk about real quick is realities of public opinion. People do not like cash transfer programs. And I know we're at a cash transfer conference, and I think they are the way forward. But the political realities in America are that people have a very paternalistic streak. And I'd like to show you some figures now. So this is from this study from Wisconsin version 2020. A little bit pixelated, apologies, but that says that 72% of Americans in the survey, I believe it was a sample size of about 3,000, favored in-kind versus cash. Now this changed when you start splitting it up by income level. Poor people, of course, prefer cash. But why is this? Like, why does the general population have such strong opinions about preferring in-kind? Well, based on the survey questions, mainly paternalism. The way they defined this in the study was about having ideas of knowing what's better for poor people than they do themselves. The next one was categories of rights. So the idea that, well, housing might be a right, or food might be a right, water might be a right. Money itself is not a general right. I wish people would think through that a little bit more, but it sticks nevertheless. And then, yeah, targets most needy, reciprocity, society's better off, bizarre, poorest preference, demonstrably false, and political feasibility. Yeah, so that's what we're dealing with, and that's why I think it's really important to explore all kinds of different policies, even if we might think they might not be worth exploring. So yeah, what is a negative income tax? It is a tax schedule where instead of the lowest earners owing $0, they actually are given a rebate on their income. It was actually proposed by Milton and Rose Friedman, arch conservatives, in Capitalism and Freedom, which is quite surprising to some people. But yeah, it was considered in some form by Nixon, almost passed the 92nd Congress. It was shot down. Conservative Democrats and Republicans killed it. So yeah, what does it actually look like? So a regular, if we had no tax, if we were a libertarian society, it would just be this: you make your money, no taxes, go all the way up. With a progressive income tax, which we currently have, as you make money, you pay some of it away, and this gets steeper as you go. And then for a negative income tax, you're actually reimbursed money under a certain amount. So it seems in this scenario, if this were a family, this person seems guaranteed about $10,000. And this was stolen from Wikipedia. Yeah. So the two parameters, we give a per person guarantee, and that will be the intercept here, how much they get when they're making $0. And then we also set the phase out rate, and that's what sets the slope of this and how quickly it phases out as they earn more money. So what's really attractive about this also, I think it's really a lot simpler than most policies. I could spend, I helped model in PolicyEngine, SNAP, and WIC. We spent weeks and months and months and months and months doing that. This is two parameters, two knobs. A lot easier to change, a lot easier to criticize, a lot easier to probe into and understand what's actually going on under the surface. So yeah. And we also add in a fixed infant allowance, so $120 a month for children 1 and under. And I'm going to play around with that in the future and try to explore that some more. So yeah, let's get into it. I studied 3 different NITs. I studied a 50% phase out, a 33% phase out, and a 25% phase out with different guarantee amounts. So before we get into that, though, here's just what the current situation looks like for Americans. If you're a family with 2 parents and 2 children in California, I think, you at $0 of income, you get about $10,000 in benefits. So benefits are net income minus employment income in this graph. And you continue all the way up until about 55, 56K. And then you have this drop off. You lose your SNAP benefits. And this is a little more steep than we would see in like current times because of the SNAP emergency allotment once again. And you do not recover from that. You don't get back to the same net income until you are making about, I think, $15,000 more. So these are the welfare cliffs that we're dealing with. I want to thank Max and Nikhil at PolicyEngine for coming up with this really great chart. I think it really illustrates the problems with the current welfare system quite eloquently. Let's get into negative income tax. This is what it looks like if you had a 50% phase out. And let me just break down this legend for you real quick. In every graph you're going to see, the green line is the budget neutral amount. So if we just took the money that we're spending on SNAP, WIC, National School Lunches, and we put it towards a negative income tax, this is the income schedule we could recreate. And yeah, this is actually quite a bit worse, I think, in some respects. A lot of people lose a lot of money right here. It also creates another really tiny cliff. And then when we go to the poverty reduction effects, just focus on the gray lines here. This is a change. So above means increase, below means decrease, and it's relative to like the units here. So it's a percent of percent change. Until you get to 5,000 or until $4,500 per person, you're increasing poverty under this plan. It's not great. You're also really increasing infant and child poverty under the budget neutral phase. So it doesn't seem like a good idea. With a 33% phase out rate, things get quite a bit better. There's less of a gap between the original schedule, and we also eliminate that very ugly mini cliff that we created. There's still some issues with this though. Even though it looks nice, and even though it seems to eliminate that cliff, we're increasing poverty by about 10%, 25% for infant poverty. However, because of the phase out, people get more of that money as they lose it slower. They lose their benefits slower as they earn employment income. So there's positive effects once we get to $4,000 a person guarantee. It starts reducing poverty quite significantly, actually, once we get to 5,000. This is, really, I think the important thing is if you look at the budget neutral amount for this one and for the 50%, it's night and day. I'm sorry, for the $4,000 guarantee, it's really night and day. Design really matters here, and really drastically changes outcomes. So yeah, and then going on to the final one that I looked at, 25% phase out. In this situation, it's a lot better. It's a lot smoother. We can give a smaller per person guarantee. That is a trade-off because you have to pay along as it phases out for the person. So with 50%, we're actually able to give $3,800 per person. With a 25% phase out, we're only be able to give $3,100 per person. So that's also important to look at. But yeah, I think out of these three, this is quite clearly the best. It has the smoothest income schedule, and it also reduces the cliffs. But as we'll see again, at a budget neutral amount, it increases poverty. Infant poverty by 20%, poverty and child poverty by 10%. Once you get to 4,000, we have the same kind of situation where we start seeing decrease in poverty. But again, that's not budget neutral. That's a 25% increase over 3,000 per person. So there's some issues with the NIT that it's neglecting some of the most vulnerable. And yeah, gonna wrap up there. Despite their simplicity, NITs have worse poverty outcomes than in-kind programs at budget neutral amounts. I think I wanted to take a more optimistic spin on this. I think that it's really good to see that with only 25% more outlay that we could get considerably better programs. I doubt that we could spend 25% more on SNAP and WIC and National School Lunches and get anywhere close to such a poverty reduction effect, but it still proposes a big problem. Yeah, I think NITs present an opportunity to remove welfare cliffs if designed properly. 50% phase out is worse than the actual current scenario. So we have to be very careful, and if we are going to ever push for this in any form, like very specific about what the exact form is. And yeah, I think going forward, there's a couple routes. I want to look more into infant and child allowances. It's really striking to me that infant and child poverty are increased quite significantly under these negative income taxes. And then also, I think we're going to start working at PolicyEngine on imputing the administrative totals for different programs, or at least that's what I want to do for this, to get a closer estimate to Witherspoon, Rhodes, and Schaefer, where they estimated a similar negative income tax. But I want to do it on a per person basis, whereas they did it on a per family basis. So that might also be leading to some of the poverty increase effects, simply measuring on a family versus a poverty unit, individual unit for poverty. So yeah, that should be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I just point out we're running a little behind schedule, so if we want to leave time for questions, please try to stay within the 10 minutes, and I'll turn it over to Ann.
Thanks, Mike, and feel free to nudge me if I'm getting close to my 10 minutes. So as Mike mentioned, Maine Equal Justice, where I work, is a civil legal aid organization working to increase economic security and opportunity and equity here in Maine. So we really see firsthand the ways in which the existing safety net lifts tens and thousands of Mainers out of poverty each year. We hear every day from people about how essential these programs are to health and well-being of Maine people and to our state and our state's economy. At the same time, though, we also hear about the inadequacies and challenges of the existing safety net. It's comprised of dozens and dozens of programs, which are often siloed and administered and funded by different state and federal agencies. And so this makes programs really difficult for clients to navigate, since there's no one resource or place for people to go to receive them. And even beyond that, eligibility for each program is really individualized to that program and varies greatly between programs. And so too often eligibility is based on federal poverty level, which I think we all know is incomplete and outdated. Also, what counts as income for different programs varies based on program. And so, as Nick was alluding to with the benefits cliff, often a family could get increased TANF benefits, but they'll lose SNAP benefits. And so this makes the process of applying for assistance and determining eligibility really complex and burdensome for both clients and for the administering agencies. And then eligibility and program guidelines are complicated by this interplay between state and federal funding sources and laws. And so I think all of this makes clear that the existing benefit structure isn't working in a rational manner for the people it's intended to help. And I think we really recognize that a guaranteed income offers us an opportunity to build on what studies and, most importantly, people in poverty say works, giving people the flexibility offered by providing unrestricted cash would enable us to move beyond the decentralized, uncoordinated, and dehumanizing system that we now have. And I think it's also worth noting that it's not by accident that these programs are so difficult to navigate. It's by design. And I won't get into this too much because I think Luisa might speak to this and can speak to it better than I can. But the safety net, as we all know, is created around these ideas about the deserving and undeserving poor, and also connects to really horrible and racist notions that Black people are lazy, with policies being designed to deny benefits to able-bodied people who are not working. And so I guess the tension that I want people to hold in my presentation and in general are that these programs are flawed, but they're also critical for people in the here and now, in that we can't just move to a guaranteed income with the snap of a finger. I think beyond the political considerations, there's the interaction between guaranteed income and the safety net, with people potentially ending up worse off if they get a guaranteed income, becoming ineligible for other programs. And I think it's also worth remembering that states get huge amounts of money from the federal government for these safety net programs, which states on their own can't replicate with their own budgets, at least given the current political landscape in many states. So I think we need to take steps that move us towards a guaranteed income, but at the same time, there are opportunities to improve the adequacy and coordination of the existing safety benefit structure. And these changes would help move us in the long-term direction of guaranteed income while taking available steps to get additional needed income to people now. So to that end, I'm going to quickly talk through some of the opportunities that states can take to improve the existing safety net by making programs more adequate, streamlined, and less burdensome to individuals. And some of these examples can be achieved administratively, and some would require legislation. Some could be fully federally funded, while some would require state funds. And so I've kind of separated these out into buckets. The first that I'll talk about is enhancing existing programs by increasing the amount that people are given. So states have the flexibility to, for example, increase the TANF benefit amount. So right now in Maine, the maximum TANF grant for a family of 3 is $620 per month. And it's higher for people with high housing costs, but you can see that this is incredibly low and unacceptable. That basic benefit level as a percent of the federal poverty level is 34%. So a lot can be done there. And the same is true with other programs, for example, increasing state tax credit amounts. Another area is increasing eligibility for different programs. So we could make TANF eligibility more responsive to the poverty level. In Maine, for every 100 families living in poverty, only about 22% receive TANF. So that's known as the TANF to poverty ratio. So I think that illustrates the failures in eligibility design, but also access issues, which Nick spoke of and which I can speak to. Another area is around equity, making sure all immigrants are eligible for programs. So as many of you probably know, federal welfare reform created 2 categories of immigrants for benefits eligibility purposes, qualified and not qualified. And so there's a lot we can do at the state level to provide immigrants who are barred from federal supports at the state level. We can also get rid of certain restrictions and conditionalities in programs. So for example, there's a lot states can do to get rid of a strict focus on work requirements in the TANF program, which Vermont actually just did. And while there are limits to what states can do under federal TANF law, there's a great deal of flexibility states can take. For example, extending TANF time limits for families. And then we can also take steps to remove restrictions on what people can spend money on. And again, some of these things are restricted at the federal level, but there are flexibility states can take. And then another bucket is around ease of access. So in many cases, programs exist, but people are not using them, sometimes because of stigma, sometimes because people just don't know that they exist. And so there are things states can do to enhance outreach. There's also ways to streamline safety net programs. So for example, someone who receives SNAP and TANF could be made automatically eligible for another program. In Maine, we recently did this with our heating assistance program, so that people don't have to, again, verify their eligibility. They're just deemed automatically eligible. There are also things we can do technology-wise to improve applications and make them less burdensome, and then more coordination between state agencies who administer these different programs. And then the last bucket I have just called making programs better so that people actually want to access them or can access them and get value out of them. So making sure these programs are delivered in a culturally and linguistically appropriate way, that they're trauma informed. And I think this connects to access too. And again, is in some ways at odds with the design of these programs, but I still think there's a lot states can do in making them more informed and accountable to the people who are impacted in using these programs. So increasing the extent to which our, for example, Department of Health and Human Services has to be accountable to the people it's serving through TANF, and in making sure we're assessing as we go how the program is doing. And I think this connects too to changing the culture. So in conclusion, I will just say that I think that there's real value in maintaining and strengthening the existing safety net in all these ways I've described. And these are things we can do now to help people now. And in many cases with existing federal options we can take advantage of and in funds. And at the same time, we need to be thoughtful and intentional about building on these changes to move us towards a guaranteed income that would build on and complement the existing safety net and move us towards this longer term vision in a way that doesn't unintentionally harm people.
Great. Thank you, Anne. And without further ado, I'll turn it over
Thank you,
to
Mike.
Luisa.
One of the things I did want to remind you is that I'm a professor emerita. I'm retired, so like you just coming in. So thank you. I'm pleased to be here. So the pandemic exacerbated the challenging situation faced by millions of people in the U.S. and abruptly demonstrated that many safety net programs often fail to keep people afloat. The premise behind safety net programs, which Anne and Nick have already talked about, perhaps they should be more fittingly called social insurance programs, is to provide minimum assistance to people in need without undermining their willingness to work. Decades of research, however, reveals that they do not adequately secure basic needs for families and individuals, but studies do confirm that people do not stop working upon receiving aid, despite conservative claims to the contrary. In many ways, the recent crisis brought guaranteed income back into a conversation begun actually centuries ago, but entertained more seriously under the Nixon administration to provide universal support, but ultimately as a backdoor to eliminate public service programs, assistance programs overall. This is something I continue to be extremely leery about, as others should be also. As ideological divides in this country become harsher and more punitive, and as history would remind us, the negative ramifications can in fact be devastating. I expect that I'm not the only one in the room who wrote myriads of public comment briefs on the Trump administration's attempts to continually decimate the safety net. It was actually quite dizzying. Working toward poverty reduction and resolution for over 50 years now, I embraced Nixon's portion of a universal basic income when few others did. I have not abandoned it as a public policy worthy of attention. Its weightiness, however, arises when we consider its implementation, assess its costs, how to pay for it, and consider its impact and potential consequences. One of the issues requiring particularly close attention is benefit cliffs, the loss of benefits to recipients who opt in for cash over restrictive support services. Recent GI experiments have sprung up across the country, but they're small, conditional, and most often have little in common with regards to the target populations that they serve. But all aim to provide limited cash assistance in different ways to supplement the targeted population's ability to better support themselves in their chosen way. Many were begun when other programs had failed to sustain individuals and families. Instituted during a pandemic, we do need to ask if their outcomes would have been the same outside of that situation. Cash assistance, as both Anne and Nick have noted, has risks. Exceeding a public assistance program's financial eligibility as a result of receiving cash may result in losing that assistance and other benefits, that relentless domino effect. Programs like SSI, for example, are most problematic, as any increase in income, usually at least in this state over $60, will reduce the next month's payment. How does a design for GI allow for that? Housing vouchers are also problematic and the most difficult to recoup if lost. Voluntary or involuntary loss triggers a fall to the bottom of the wait list, unless one is homeless and gets priority status, but that's hardly a viable or humane way to get people housed. Section 8 housing in Maine right now has an 8-year waiting list. Shelter vouchers, 4 to 5 months. Some programs allow reentry more easily, such as SNAP, heating assistance, WIC, and TANF, but there's still a wait. What happens during that wait? The challenges and complexity of removing these benefit cliffs are at the heart of designing and implementing GI pilots. Among questions to consider, what information is vital to decision-making to ensure a cliff fall doesn't occur? What tools help navigate this extraordinarily complex maze to arrive at a quote-unquote right answer? How comprehensive are they? Do we know enough about which programs trigger losses in other programs? How would GI interact with existing programs? We must also confront the ethics of passing on decision-making to people living on the edge or below, especially within a maze as complex as the one that we have now. I don't know about some of you, but I can't get through it. And I'm sure that many of you others can't get through it either. The threat of losing benefits is a constant among those relying on safety net programs. A former recipient once said to me that it's an active crisis mindset all the time. How do we extend knowledge of complex systems to ensure that decisions are the safest and most viable? That forgoing a service in lieu of cash is the best option to increasing longer-term stability or at least decreasing instability. I'm not saying that people should not have decision-making power over their lives. Of course they must. But we also know there's abundant research from psychology showing that stress impairs decision-making. How well do any of us make decisions when confronting a crisis? I will certainly admit that when I don't always act rationally when overwhelmed, but instead look for the easiest fix and pay the price later. Are decisions we're making reversible if the resultant outcome was terrible? In Stockton, California, implicit in their pilot is the idea that individuals can be trusted to make the best financial decisions for themselves and their families. How does that implicit aspect get built into the GI pilots that move forward? Unless we forget, there are the irreverent voices of naysayers who embrace mythical, unsubstantiated notions of deservedness, hard work, and personal responsibility. As they endlessly raise these quote-unquote concerns, their opinions permeate and disrupt the political discourse, despite the plethora of research data that belies their claims. They've always demanded strict accountability for social insurance program expenditures. What do we have to offer them? How do we quell their angst and dispel them of their apprehensions and reduce their ability to make life even worse for people than it might already be? They are a force to be reckoned with and will, I fear, get louder, as we have seen over the last week, and more punitive over time. They must be in our minds as we move forward with both garnering broader support and developing pilot designs. I expect that most of us were humbled by Congress's failure to extend the child tax credit, perhaps the closest we have come to a nationwide GI-like program. Despite the dramatic reduction in poverty rates among children, the perceived absence of political payoffs in the short term and an exaggerated view of the costs over the long term made it unpalatable. Ideology prevailed over human worthiness. This is the politics of social policy making, and we can never overlook the politics. So what do we need to know before we launch into implementation, be it large scale or pilot programs? Do we have the evidence essential to make the case for serious consideration of GI programs throughout the country? Right now, I would say no. The evidence we do have is from small programs focused on different populations in different parts of the country with short windows of cash assistance. We don't have answers to the many questions before us. Good social science research and sound policy making requires that we do, that we go in with the best case that can be made. We have in front of us right now what I would call a big idea, which we must now de-risk. Meeting basic human needs is what's at stake. Above all else, any effort to secure basic needs for citizens must do no harm. The most fragile among us must not be made any worse off than they already are. As Anne was saying, we can't expect GI to replace the safety net as shredded as it is. It should be instead viewed as another tool in our arsenal. We need to think carefully about how GI will interact with the dozens of existing programs and services. We need to ensure that GI can strengthen the current system, provide better support to those using programs and services, and lessen the effects of deep-rooted racial and economic inequalities. We would be remiss in not keeping GI or UMB or BMI on the table as a policy coupled with other policies. We cannot continue to fail in upholding the tenets of the social contract. How to best provide the support people need to meet the demands of daily life is the bigger question, and it's a formidable challenge. But we can, as Anne said, not forgo the opportunity to seriously consider and promote changes that could now be made to and in existing programs, and she has addressed many of those. For most Americans, the question is not if they need to rely on one of these programs, but when. And I would argue that most already benefit from social insurance programs. Perhaps the greatest challenge, part of this challenge, is in getting consensus among the citizenry that ensuring basic human needs as a basic human right is the obligation of government. There, we've got a long way to go and a longer way after this past week. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Louisa. And thank you all for these very sobering and thoughtful presentations. I haven't seen anybody post a question, so I would just like to open it up to the panelists. If any of you want to pose questions to each other, we have about 4 minutes left.
And I will say that I appreciate your bringing forward some ideas, because I think that one of the things that we can't do is be critical of GI programs and say that we need to look at how to change programs unless we also bring solutions and resolutions into that conversation. And I think that we often forget that. So I think that you're bringing those ideas in are absolutely critical. The other thing I would say is that, Nan, I know you do this regularly at MEJEP, is to bring participants, recipients of services in to really get a handle on what the pros and cons and the stigmas are.
Thanks, Louisa, for bringing that piece up about the value of input from impacted people about these different policy choices. And I feel like we try to co-create policies at Maine Equal Justice, and so thinking too as we move towards a guaranteed income or take steps, thinking intentionally with people about how we're sequencing it, because to me that's the hardest part here, is thinking about the transition and in how we're sequencing things so that we're not negatively harming people, as you've laid out, in being responsible and ethical.
We have a question. Melanie Calvin asks, is there anyone in your areas helping people with the horrible SSI application?
And I think are people at Maine Equal Justice? I think they are.
Yeah, I know often in areas there are legal services organizations or social workers who can help people with applications. But I think what you bring up is a really important point, just about the burdens and the hoops that you have to jump through in terms of verifying all of these different pieces, but also just the technology, the paperwork. Many of these applications are many pages long, and it just doesn't need to be like that. Code for America is an organization that has done lots of amazing work with helping state agencies redesign their applications. And so I think there's a lot that we could be doing there in terms of just making things more human-centered and designed in a way that will make programs easy to apply for and access.
Yeah, I am working on a project with Anne's organization in which there is some cash assistance being given to mothers who are low-income moms or mothers on TANF to go to higher education. And one of the things that is coming up is that if somebody is applying for the cash, if they're getting SSI, in addition, for themselves or for their children, they need to know the ramifications, and the likelihood is that they would not continue to apply because the ramifications would be dramatic and really extraordinarily problematic.
I think we have, we're actually at the end, but maybe a quick response to one more question. What research do you think we still need to gather to fill the gaps to help us make the case and implement a basic income? From Kimberly.
Yeah, I'll take this. I think that a lot of the questions have been answered. I mean, I do agree that there's a lot of need for rigorous research, but I think we know that it doesn't make people not work. We know that it doesn't. We know that it works better than in-kind benefits. I think there needs to be less focus to some degree on proving that giving cash to people lets them get what they need, and I think I think a lot of it going forward is just political. I think a lot of it's political, and a lot of it has to be made to voters directly.
We are now at the end of our time, just as the conversation is ramping up. So I hope other people will watch this. Tell your friends to watch. This is a very important contribution to the ongoing discussion we're having here at the conference. And I hope to see you all at later sessions. There's a few closing remarks I should make. I want to thank everybody for coming. A recording of the session will be available when the broadcast ends using the same link you used to register and join the session. If you'd like to continue the conversation, you can head over to Kumo Space during the lunch break to meet with other conference attendees and speakers. And join us for our morning plenary session, Supporting Babies, Ending Child Poverty, with remarks from Representative Rashida Tlaib to present the details of the End Child Poverty Act. This session will discuss the arguments for and against targeting children for basic income policies, and we will also announce the winners of this year's high school essay contest on basic income. But before that, we have more sessions coming up, so please check out the conference website for the full schedule. I want to thank the speakers and everybody attending today. Good to see you all, and hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.